Hey guys, thank you so much for clicking on today's video. My name is Annalise and I just started making houseplant content here on YouTube. So if you are new here, which you probably are, definitely hit the subscribe button and get excited for some really fun planty content to come. So today I wanted to talk about plant propagations. I have a bunch of propagations out here in front of me. I don't think you can see them, but I will show you. But I wanted to talk about the main methods of propagation that I use and some tips and tricks to make sure that your plants propagate successfully. So first off, what is plant propagation? Basically, it's when you take a plant that you have, you cut it at a certain point on the plant, and then you put it in a medium that helps it grow new roots so you can make new plants. So basically, you can turn one plant into many plants. Very exciting for people who are obsessed with plants like me. So today I wanted to talk about my 3 favorite methods of propagation. The first is water propagation. So for instance, how I'm propagating this monstera, just in a cup of water. The second is sphagnum propagation, which you can see in this jar. There's some sphagnum moss in here. And finally, there is perlite propagation. So perlite basically in a jar like the sphagnum moss. So I want to quickly go through each of the 3 and talk about the pros and cons, or what I like most and least about each of the different methods. So first up, with water propagation, it's really the easiest method of propagation. You basically fill any sort of container you have. You can use a vase, you can use a cup. It doesn't have to be clear or glass. You can use any sort of container, fill it with water and plop a plant into it. So this monstera has been in here for I think about 2 weeks, and you can see it's starting to root. That white area is a brand new root. I also have some Rhaphidophora tetrasperma cuttings in here, and they are also starting to root as well. So water is super easy. And if you're nosy like me, it's fun because you get to watch the root growth. I honestly check on this every day just to see how much the roots are growing. So I do really like water propagation. I do recommend changing the water out every week or so, or once you're noticing that it's getting a little bit murky. But other than that, they're very low maintenance. I've noticed that water propagation works really well with monstera, a lot of different varieties of monstera, with philodendron and with epipremnum, so what we commonly call pothos. Those all seem to propagate really well and quickly in water without any issues of rot or anything like that. Usually I like to wait until the roots are about an inch or 2 before I take them out of the water and transfer them to soil or leca or whatever medium I'm putting them in. So let me see if I have any that would be ready to, there's one in here that's ready to go. So this is a silver sword cutting that I have that's been propagating in this jar of water. And as you can see, it does have a pretty long root here. This is about maybe 3 inches, and there are secondary roots, which means that there are little roots coming off of this main root. So I would feel comfortable potting this up in soil or leca because there's enough root growth for it to successfully transition over. I am gonna wait because I have a bunch of cuttings in this jar and that's the only one that's ready, and I wanna pot them up together. So I'm not gonna pot these up today, but that's what it looks like basically when a plant is ready to be potted up. Okay, so my second favorite method of propagation is using sphagnum moss. So there's a lot of different brands. I use this Super Moss brand I got off Amazon. It comes in this big block of dry sphagnum. And basically when you're ready to use it, you pull pieces off of it, wet them, make sure they're damp, not dripping wet, but damp. Usually I'll wet it in a bowl and then wring it out with my hands and put it in a fresh container. And then you can place a plant inside of the sphagnum. So for instance, this was actually a chunk, and a chunk is basically a stem cutting with a node on it, but no leaf. So this started out as a chunk, and I put it in some sphagnum, and over time it grew roots. You can see there's tons of roots around the jar. So I like clear containers because you can really see the root growth. Then when it was ready, it started putting out leaves. So it has 2 leaves out right now, and it's putting out a 3rd. There's definitely enough roots, as you can see, to transfer this to a new medium. Probably when this new leaf finishes coming out, I'll transfer it. I don't want to disrupt anything going on right now. But sphagnum's a really great medium for things like chunks, where if you put a stem cutting in water, it will rot. So something like that, you would need to use sphagnum or perlite or leca or another medium like that. So I like sphagnum for plants that are a little bit more difficult to propagate, maybe Hoya for instance, or philodendron that are rarer that I'm more worried about rot. So if there's a plant that was maybe really expensive or I'm really worried about and don't want to have to ever replace or have any risk going on with rot, I'll use sphagnum because I'm just more comfortable with that because I've never had a plant rot in sphagnum, and I've definitely had plants rot in water. So sphagnum is the second method. So the third method of propagation is perlite propagation. So I'll show this example. I have some Hoya Burtonii cuttings that I got and I put into perlite. So here's a jar just filled with perlite. And when you put the perlite in the jar, make sure to put water in it so all of the perlite is damp. You don't want there to be a huge reservoir of water at the bottom. I'll usually leave about maybe an inch of water at the bottom and make sure the perlite is all damp. And then you just stick your stem cuttings in and wait for them to root. Perlite, from what I've seen, this is really one of my first times really using it, but from what I've heard, perlite is really good for Hoya. Apparently they grow roots really quickly in perlite and can be used kind of interchangeably with sphagnum. So that's something I definitely want to try to use more often now that I've been trying it out and it's been going well. So let's get into cutting up some plants and setting up some propagations. And then once we do that, I'll show you all the propagations that I have going right now and their progress, and then I can give updates down the road on how they're doing. So I think the first plant I want to cut up, yeah, we'll go with this one. So this is my silver band Maranta. She's super beautiful. She grows so quickly for me, but she's kind of all on this one side of the pot. As you can see, she's all coming over here, and I would love it to be a little bit more around the entire pot. So I want to take a cutting, root it, and replant it back in the same pot on this side. So that's another thing you can do with propagations. You don't have to make a new plant. You can put the rooted plant back in the same pot to make a fuller plant. So I've already done that once with this plant. So it started out as literally one strand of leaves, and now it has two, and I'm gonna cut it again so we'll have three. So I have my shears right here. These just came in a gardening kit I got off Amazon. And before you cut a plant, you wanna make sure to sanitize your shears, because maybe the last plant you cut had rot on it or had some sort of infection. You don't want that to spread between plants. So I use this 91% isopropyl alcohol, which just comes out in a spray. I'm gonna do it over the sink, but I'm just gonna spray these shears down, let it like air out for a second, and then rinse them off with water before I cut my first plant. Okay, so the shears are clean and ready to go. So let's look at where we wanna cut this plant. So there's this awkwardly long strand of leaves here, so I think I'm gonna cut this off. So when you're cutting this plant, you wanna make sure that you have a node, and I'm gonna show you what that looks like. So basically where there's this little darker spot, kind of like a bend in the plant, that's a node. Here, you can see it looks kind of like a knuckle, this little bump, that's a node. So you wanna make sure to cut about half an inch or an inch below that, and that's where new roots would come from. Now, if you cut above that, you wouldn't be able to get a new plant. There's no area for root growth, so the plant would just die off. So you wanna make sure you have a bump like that. And this is more specific to Maranta plants. Other plants, I'll show you in a second, have different type looking nodes, but that's what the nodes on here look like. So let us take our cut. So I'm gonna cut, you can see there's the knuckle, I'm gonna cut right below it. There we go. Simple as that. So now that this is cut, I'm gonna put this in water. I've had a lot of success with Maranta cuttings in water. They are a very water-loving plant too, and I found that they root really quickly in water. So let me grab a cup of water and I'll throw it in there. So typically I will just use plain water, but if I do want to add some extra nutrients, I'll use the liquid dirt water I have. Liquid dirt's just a fertilizer, and I put it in water and I can put that into the cup with propagations. But today I'm just going to use plain water, make it as simple and easy as possible. And I actually need to add more water to this, hold on. Now, when you're putting your cutting into the water, you want to make sure that the node that we just found is submerged in the water. So I'm making sure that when I put this in here, the node is in the water. So as you can see, it's covered by the water, and that's where the roots will come from when it starts growing roots. So just to show an example of a Maranta cutting I took a while ago, this is my variegated Maranta lecanura, that's how you say it. And I put this in water a while ago, and you can see how crazy the roots have gone. And this is probably maybe about a month, probably less. It's rooted up so quickly. This is definitely ready to pot up, I just haven't done it yet. But this is what those roots will end up looking like in another few weeks or so. Okay, so next up I wanted to take a cutting to put in sphagnum moss, but unfortunately I was gonna take a cutting of my albosingonium, you can see it here. It's all coming off of one strand, and I wanted to take a cutting and root it and put it back in the pot to make it a fuller pot. But I'm noticing that the internodal spacing, which is the space between the nodes that we just talked about, is really small, so I worry that I won't be able to really get a good cutting off it. So I'm gonna wait until it puts out a few more leaves to cut it. So we won't be cutting something to put in spag today, but I will show you some sphagnum propagations that I already have going. So I found that spag works really well with Hoya cuttings. So in this cool little glass terrarium thingy that I got at Home Goods, I put a bunch of Hoya macrophylla albo variegata cuttings, and they're doing super well. So I just made sure to bury the nodes in the sphagnum moss. Let me take one out to show you. So this is the Hoya cutting, And let me come a little closer. You can see that roots have started to form right here. This is sphagnum, but they're surrounding the roots, so I don't want to pull it off yet. So with Hoya, their roots don't come directly from the node, so I just make sure to stick usually at least up to here into the sphagnum moss, and then roots will start coming. So there's a root down here, there's a bunch of roots. So this is doing really well, and I found that Hoya do really well in general in sphagnum. So the next plant that I wanted to cut is this other Hoya macrophylla variegata cutting that I have. This is the first one that I got many months ago. Let's look when I got it. Got it in February and it's done absolutely nothing. So I'm getting tired of waiting for it to grow. So I'm gonna cut it and hopefully that encourages more growth from it. So as you can see, there's these 2 bottom leaves here, then there's a long tendril and 2 top leaves up here. So I'm gonna cut close to these 2 bottom leaves, and then I'm gonna root the top part in perlite as well. So that's rooted really well in here. You can see some of the roots on the glass, so I know it's working well in the perlite. I'm gonna do that, root it up, and hopefully we'll see some new growth on one of the cuttings. So first I'm actually gonna just cut down here near the base. And then there's a lot of stem here, so I'm just gonna cut around here because we don't need all of that stem. Great. So now I'm gonna get my container and put perlite in it and then stick this straight into it. Okay, so here's my jar with dampened perlite. I'm just gonna take this cutting, and when the perlite's wet, you can really just stick stuff straight in it. So I'm sticking it down as far as it'll go in. Great, and I'm just gonna leave it like that. So usually with my propagations, I put them directly under a grow light or in a window because they need that extra light energy to produce roots. So you really want to put them in optimal conditions in terms of humidity and light if you want to see them grow roots as quickly as possible. Okay, so now that we have those cuttings made, I think I have one more that I want to cut up. I have this strand of Scindaptus argyrius, I want to say, that came off of my mother plant. It didn't seem to be doing well, and when I was looking at this this part of the plant, it just pulled out and there were basically no roots on it. Not sure what happened. The rest of the plant is doing totally fine. It was just this one strand. So I can keep it like this and just put this whole thing in water, but I really want to make a fuller plant, so I'm going to cut these into individual leaf cuttings and put those in water individually, because then I can plant 3 different cuttings back in the pot as opposed to 1. So let me show you what a node looks like on this guy. It looks a little bit different. So here you can see this is what a node looks like. It's this little line that happens right where the leaf meets the main stem. So there's quite a few. There's a node there, there, there. And you can cut them all as individual nodes. Now, when I'm cutting, I like to keep about 1/2 inch or 1 inch of stem next to the node, just to make sure if there is any rot, you can clip it off. So let's take these cuttings. So here's the first one. I'm gonna cut between these 2 nodes. So this is our first cutting here. There is a node, that's where the roots are gonna grow from. And we will do our second cutting between these 2. There you go. And now we have this cutting and this cutting. So I'm gonna put all 3 of those cuttings into water, and they will root up super quickly. Now, some people do like to let their cuttings callus over before putting them in a propagation medium. What that means is that they just leave the cuttings out and wait for where you cut the stem to dry up a little bit, because that decreases the chance of rot. I'll do that with certain types of plants. With these little cuttings, it doesn't really matter. But if I were cutting a big, thick stem monstera, I would do that. Or anything with a kind of thicker stem, I would do that just to be sure, to reduce the risk of rot. Okay, so now that we've gone through all the main methods of propagation that I use, I thought I'd show you some of my more exciting propagations that I currently have going. I absolutely love propagating, not only to create new plants or make fuller plants, but also to have plants for trades. So I'm actually planning to trade this propagation soon, and some of the other propagations I'm taking I'm hoping to trade as well at some point. So one that I'm really loving right now is this is a Campos Portuanum top cutting. It's doing really well. As you can see, we do have decent root growth. I'm gonna let it grow out a little bit more, but it'll be there hopefully in another week or so. And just a caveat, I have a bunch of glass containers, and I've had a few people ask me where I get them. I actually get most of my glass containers at Goodwill. So this was from Goodwill for like 50 cents or something. I have a few of them. So you don't have to spend a lot of money buying glass containers. You can go to somewhere like Goodwill to get them. I also saved glass containers from bottles, so this was some sort of iced tea I had. I took off the label and cleaned the bottle, and now it's a propagation vessel. So you can use sauce containers, you can use really any sort of container that you can find. I also like using takeout containers. So this is what was from some takeout Thai food that we got, and this is a great vessel for either water propagation if you have a bigger plant, or if you want to put sphagnum in here, you can put a plant in here as well. These are also great to create a little high humidity environment. So if you have the lid and you put the lid on, it'll create kind of a mini terrarium in here, and that'll help the plant root even faster because the humidity will be really high in the container. So I definitely recommend keeping these, also because help save the environment, don't throw out your single-use plastics, reuse, reuse, reuse. So I'm reusing all this plastic stuff for my propagations of my plants. The next exciting set of propagations I have is inside my prop box. So this is my propagation box. Basically what it is, it's just a plain Tupperware container that you can get at your local store, Home Depot, Walmart, whatever. And I fill the entire bottom layer with sphagnum moss, and then I put a bunch of my cuttings in here. So as you can see, there's a lot of condensation on the top, which is showing that the humidity level is really high in this box, which is great for cuttings, helps them root a lot faster. So I absolutely love using a propagation box just because your cuttings are gonna root really, really well and really quickly. If you want me to do a full tutorial on how I make my propagation box, I can definitely do that. But for now, I'll just show you some of the exciting cuttings that are inside of it. So this is what it looks like inside, just a bunch of sphagnum moss and a bunch of cuttings coming out. So one super exciting cutting from the box is this Monstera Peru cutting I took. This was actually a chunk when I started. It didn't have this leaf. It was just a piece of stem, and it's growing some roots, and then it put out the cutest little leaf in the propagation box. So I'm gonna wait till it has some secondary roots growing off this first root before I pot it up, but it's doing really well. It grew that leaf. It has another growth point coming out right here next to the leaf, so doing really well. I also have two cuttings that are my pride and joys right now. This is a variegated Heteracea cutting, here are two of them actually, and they've been rooting in my prop box. So you can see this one's rooting really well. This root's probably about 3 inches. I'm gonna wait a little bit more just to be safe because this is an expensive cutting and I don't wanna risk anything happening to it in the transition from sphagnum to another medium, but rooting up really well. And this one, there's some spag on the roots, but this one also has a decent amount of roots as well, as well as a growth point. So these are doing really well and loving the propagation box. Okay, so just to go quickly through a few more of the cuttings I have currently. One of my plants, my Brandianum, got spider mites and I didn't feel like dealing with it with all the soil, so I just cut up the entire plant and put them in water. So these are rooting up right now in water. It's a very pretty plant. I do love the leaves on the brandy. I also have some Micans cuttings rooting in water. I accidentally knocked this stem off when I was repotting my Micans, but I just put them in water and now I'll have extra plants to put in the pot to make it fuller. These are some Monstera Siltopecana cuttings in a kombucha bottle. They're rooting up really well. These are actually almost ready to be potted up, which is exciting. I also will throw a lot of different types of cuttings in one container just because I don't have enough containers to put individual cuttings in. So this is a little jam jar and there's tons of cuttings in it. So here's a Cebu blue cutting. This is from my Tradescantia. Actually, the rest of them are different types of Tradescantia cuttings. So I'm really hoping my Cebu blue cuttings root up soon because my Cebu blue right now only has one strand because I grew it from a one-leaf cutting and I really want to make a fuller pot. Other cuttings that are doing well, this is my Philodendron Florida Green or Philodendron pedatum, and this one's pretty rooted, ready to be potted up for sure. Probably gonna put it in leca, actually with my other plant. This is a immature tetrasperma cutting, but look at those roots, they're crazy. I definitely need to pot this up. I don't know what I'm waiting on, but it's ready to go. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for all of my exciting propagations that I have going right now. If you have any questions about any of the methods I talk about, definitely leave in the comment down below. I'll be sure to answer. And if you have questions on how to chop a specific plant or what type of method would be great for a specific plant, definitely let me know and I'll give you my best answer. Obviously, I'm not a professional, I'm just talking from my own experience. But if you haven't propagated before, definitely try it. It's so much fun, a little bit addicting. I keep chopping my plants even though I should let them grow bigger. But definitely a fun activity. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you stuck around to the end, I really appreciate it. If you can, give this video a like and a comment. That would mean so much to me. So thank you so much, everybody. I will see you in the next video. Bye.